Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Albert Cho. The U.S. and South Korea recently held their annual joint military exercise, Freedom Shield, for 11 days to counter the North Korean threat. On the first day of the exercise, North Korea launched several ballistic missiles into the Yellow Sea west of the Korean Peninsula. This marks the first intercontinental missile launch by North Korea since U.S. President Donald Trump took office. In the face of escalating tensions in Northeast Asia, what is Trump's strategy for his second term? Joining us today are Leonard Chao, National Tsinghua University Adjunct Professor, and William Vocke, Western Pacific Fellowship Project Vice President. A very warm welcome to both on the show.
Thank you.
According to a report by Yonhap News Agency, the South Korean military stated that this year's exercise included tactics related to potential cooperation between North Korea and Russia. The drill also specifically simulated missions to destroy weapons of mass destruction deep within North Korean enemy territory, with drones and robots deployed as pioneers. So first of all, how should we observe the first U.S.-South Korea military exercise after Trump's inauguration? Professor Zhang.
Well, I think the timing for this military exercise, we can easily tell that it was not initiated by President Trump. It was a rather, result of the policy or agreement execution in the later period of Biden administration. So they are now simply executing the military drill. We all know that the military exercise between the U.S. and South Korea have become a normal, very, it's not frequently, conducted, but it's not a surprise for this kind of exercise over the past few years, since since Trump's Trump point one, okay, so 01. So I think now it's continuation of this military training. But I think that something is worth observing is that this kind of military cooperation per se between the U.S. and South Korea, would that continue during the Trump's 2.0? That remains to be seen.
Dr. Vocke, actually Trump has previously stated that South Korea should bear more of the military costs, or the United States will pull out its troops from South Korea. So, the figure like U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense nominee, he's still the nominee, Elbridge Colby, has also mentioned that South Korea should handle its defense against North Korea. He actually said something similar to Taiwan. So allowing U.S. forces to focus on the threat from China. So what is Trump's administration's strategy for Northeast Asia now? Could you give us some kind of assessment?
It's not really clear what the strategy is for Northeast Asia. I think the remarkable thing about the military exercises is that there was nothing remarkable. Trump has made lots of very swift, major changes, both domestically and internationally in American foreign policy, American domestic policy, and things have kind of gone on as normal in Northeast Asia. Clearly, among Trump's advisors, he has appointed a large number of people who would be identified as China hawks. And so in terms of Korea and North Korea, it's expected that that's going to be handled in terms of the relationship with China and in terms of the relationship with Russia. But I think the change since the Ukrainian war of the Russia and North Korea becoming increasingly close, North Korea supplying munitions, North Korea supplying troops, to Russia and the Ukraine war. That's been a significant change that we don't yet know how they're going to react to.
Well, the figure like Elbridge Colby, he was questioned, by the GOP members that he's not as hawkish as maybe what you suggest as a China hawk on countries like Iran. So how can we figure out this kind of people surrounding Trump and how they are going to impact Trump's decision making, especially in this East Asia region, his foreign policy?
Well, the people around Trump are likely to have less influence on policy this time around than they were in his first term. In his first term, he surrounded himself with people who might be considered part of kind of the traditional Republican elite. The national security bureaucracy from the Republican Party. This time he surrounded himself with loyalists who have, in some cases, not very clear ideas, or at least not very clear ideas that they've expressed publicly about Northeast Asia strategy. So I think it's just very hard to assess right now what the Northeast Asia strategy is going to be. clearly it's going to be a combination of transactions and contact or impact with China, which is going to play a dominant role, I think, in his position on Northeast Asia. But the third thing, of course, is simply Trump and his personality.
Yeah, okay. Professor Chao, so what is Trump's administration's strategy for Northeast Asia? And the same question for you.
Well, I think this, at this moment, I agree with Dr. Vocke's comment that it's still early to tell what his foreign policy is going to be look like. And at this moment, we all know the priority in Trump's on his mind is rather to settle these two ongoing regional conflict, if not regional wars, namely the war in Ukraine and also the Middle East conflict, and particularly in the Gaza Strip. So given this context, so I think right now, let's try not to apply the traditional or conventional any new president's foreign policy worldwide. He's a rather it's a bizarre kind of leadership. What he has in mind at this moment is that the tariffs, everything is tariffs oriented, tariffs conscious. So I think he doesn't have any the word we have been very familiar over the past years about the so-called geopolitics. He's rather focusing on the geoeconomics, or more precisely, more narrowed down. It's kind of not geoeconomics. It's a Trump economics, like money. That's the only thing he has in mind before he's going to seriously consider the foreign policy to be to lie ahead for a U.S. new administration. So in this context, I would like to add up some comment on his foreign policy advisors. Now, although he has appointed a number of national security advisor or state Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he's obviously a former senator. He's a very hawkish anti-China representative in the Trump administration, as opposed to Elon Musk, the people so-called the pro-China number of his team. But I think for the Northeast Asia policy per se, that it's hardly a president's matter to decide.
Right.
So now over the past 2 days, I think we have seen the name. He just appointed a new assistant secretary for East Asian affairs. So in the State Department, I think his name is Michael G. Decembre. Decembre is going to be a new nominee for East Asia assistant secretary, but of course he has to go past the approval of Senate nomination hearing. So this particular person, he's going to play a major role in the mapping or executing the new U.S. policy about Northeast Asia.
Okay, let's come back to the topic related to Northeast Asia. South Korea actually has launched 2 intercontinental missiles within 2 months. The last launch was in mid-January, just before Trump took office. So, and this time was in response to U.S.-South Korea military exercises, which is kind of the topic of this show. How should we interpret North Korea's repeated testing of Trump's administration's limits? William?
Well, I guess I would slightly disagree with the phrasing that it's a testing of his limits. I think this is North Korea simply being North Korea. It's a combination of doing testing that they have been doing on a regular basis through the last several years. And it's also a little bit of waving their hand saying, look, don't forget about me. Here I am. I've got nuclear weapons and we're a major player. So I don't think it's at this point a test. I think the really interesting thing is that Trump has a tendency to want to deal with international relations in terms of on a very personal basis. It's really a connection between leaders and leaderships. And we had the whole scenario with the North Korean leader Kim in his last presidency, and it's highly likely that he'll try something like that again. He had been hoping, I believe, to really make a breakthrough on North Korea last time around.
Well, in the past, when North Korea launched intercontinental missiles, that's like what they say, kind of waving their hands to try to attract attention from the global society, but also its purpose is for solving its domestic issues, for example, like a famine, like short of food and those kind of issues. But what about the purpose of this time? I mean, I know that North Korea has sent troops about 12,000, to help Russia to fight against the Ukrainian soldiers. So what's the purpose of this time, this kind of missiles launch?
As Dr. Chao said, Trump has been focused on the war in Ukraine and the conflict in Israel and the Middle East. This is kind of a byproduct, but there is a pivot. There was supposedly a pivot in the Obama administration to East Asia, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia. That turned out not to be a very strong pivot. It seems that Trump is really very interested in pivoting towards a more direct confrontational role with China. And China played a big role in the last presidential campaign for both sides. Both sides had a lot of very strong anti-China rhetoric in the last political campaign.
But if I may venture to add up that it's not something unseen or unknown that for North Korea to launch any missiles in the past few years. So that's why you might recall in the Trump 1.0, he was nicknaming the Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, because he launched a number of ballistic missiles. So he was very mad. He was pissed off by telling Kim Jong-un is that little rocky man. You remember little rocky man? So speaking of the person, I think Trump has been characterized by being a very speaking softly, with his competitors or rivals around the world.
This term.
Trump this term so far, namely the Putin and Xi Jinping. I think next target might be Kim Jong-un. So and he acts tough with his friends and neighbors, but he is softly. So I think he doesn't want to form a become enemy of the rival of the North Korea. He would like to try to mitigate the relations with North Korea. So the launching missile is not a big deal in Trump's eyes. It's become a routine for North Korea. But definitely the U.S. relation with North Korea, or more widely the Korean Peninsula, it's going to be on the priority list of his Asian policy in the future later on. So I think he would like to maybe again resort to some personal friendship, to be set up, to be restored between with Kim Jong-un.
I think this is a very interesting observation, and this time Trump might have different attitudes toward this alliance of dictatorship.
That's right.
Okay, Voice of America reported that the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson arrived at the Busan operational base in South Korea in early March. This marks the first visit of the U.S. aircraft carrier to South Korea since Trump took office. The South Korean Navy stated that this demonstrates the strong U.S.-South Korea alliance. How should we analyze the U.S.-South Korea alliance under Trump 2.0?
The alliance, as of this point, remains very strong. But as Dr. Chao said, Trump is going to ask the South Koreans to pay more, to put more money into the alliance. He's not going to exempt them probably from his tariff policy, since tariff policy is really aimed at budget issues in the United States from Trump's perspective. There's a lot of questions about that, but that's certainly how he thinks about it. And the South Korean alliance will continue to be a real crucial part of his East Asian policy, simply because I think he and his administration view China as America's major competitor in the world. And South Korea is an important part of that competition, by the way, as is Taiwan and Japan. And I think that the South Korean alliance is going to undergo change, but that change is going to be more in the direction of South Korea being expected to carry more of the weight in the alliance.
Okay, probably it's also the same case for Trump's expectation of Japan to carry its own military cost. So what about you, Professor Tsang?
Well, I think South Korea is definitely is a very fine example of the in the past few decades, the so-called neoliberal economic order. That alongside some of the rest of the so-called four little dragons, you might recall the term in Asia, namely South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore and Hong Kong. So, but those orders are going to be dismantled by Donald Trump, because I think it's fair to say Trump's re-election and also his future orientation or the execution of his future foreign policy will somehow, substantially accelerate the global retreat from the so-called neoliberal economic order, which has prevailed since 1980s. South Korea is a very fine example, but Trump has in mind is kind of again, as I repeat, the tariffs, the major term in Trump's mind. Everything can be. Seems to me that he saw that anything could be solved by his idea on the tariffs for many countries around the world. So South Korea has been worried about this kind of this kind of tendency of Trump's administration. So but we don't know, because the acting president of South Korea has expressed his concern about the Trump's administration's Korean policy, and of course after the war in the Ukraine settled down, he's going to shift to the attention to South Korea, and of course within Korea, South Korea itself. Domestically, South Korea is not settled yet because of the leadership problem and some of the constitutional issue. So I think it's a kind of double jeopardy for South Korea.
Okay. In a recent interview with the Wall Street Journal, South Korean acting president Choi San-mo mentioned that Seoul would provide its shipbuilding technology to help the U.S. revitalizing its naval industry. So how will this strengthen the U.S.-South Korea relationship, and what benefits will each side gain from this cooperation? Dr. Vocke?
It's really a clear understanding of Trump's. One of the ways we have talked about Trump in the past is that he is transactional. And this is clearly a transactional part of the South Koreans, much like TSMC is a transaction with the Americans in terms of Taiwan. It'll benefit both. It'll be an advancement of North Korean technology and investment. South Korean investment in technology. And it will benefit the United States because American shipbuilding industry has been in serious decline for the last 30 years.
Compared with CCP's technology in this regards.
Exactly. So it will be mutually beneficial. If I might, one analyst has suggested that this term is different than last term. And this term is different in the sense that Trump feels much more confident, has around him a group of loyalists. I don't think we can discount at all the fact that he survived the assassination, and there's a certain messianic character to him now as well. And I think that in terms of his approach to the world, it will be more predatory in some cases than it will be transactional. He will be expecting others to fall in line. He's also in a hurry. He's only got 4 years. And he wants to make major changes in the world in 4 years. Right now, the South Korean, U.S., Japan alliances are still seem to be a very strong part of his future policy.
Professor Chao?
Yeah. Well, I agree. Totally that the U.S. and South Korea and the Korean Peninsula is what we're talking about for this program, but that should be look into in the context of the global Asian policy or Indo-Pacific policy. I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure that if Donald Trump will carry on the legacy of Biden, in terms of the Asia policy or Indo-Pacific policy, because some of the protection fee or some of the troop settlement cost to be shared, to be bared by the countries involved. So we have to wait and see.
Okay, that's on the parts of Washington, but on the other hand, like South Korea also, what you suggested, two dimension this is that it experienced the turmoil in the domestic politics arena, especially the current president, Choi San-mo. He's only like in the transitional period. Yeah. So, let's see, maybe the next, South Korea president will pro-United States or maybe pro-China. We never know. Although the United States and South Korea continue military cooperation, Trump has not eased his stance on trade with South Korea. The Bank of Korea recently warned that Trump's tariff policy could hinder South Korea's economic growth and potentially drive inflation. So my next question for Dr. Vocke is that South Korea is one of the U.S.'s largest steel and aluminum exports markets. What significant impact does the 25% metal tariff imposed by the Trump administration have on South Korea?
Well, it will domestically have a significant impact on South Korea, and it's part of Trump's. Tariffs have two roles. One role is to raise revenue, and Trump believes that that's a wonderful way to take care of the budget deficit. The second thing that tariffs do is that they provide leverage. They provide negotiation leverage in negotiations. So that's leverage against South Korea for perhaps more payments for American military there. It's leverage for South Korea, for instance, to decrease its trade surplus, its trade balance with the United States. The actual impact remains to be seen because it'll depend upon how long the tariffs are in place. The key feature is that the way this is being done creates an immense amount of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is a key factor in how businesses make decisions. So the way it's being done leads business leaders to be cautious about investment, cautious about hiring people, cautious about supply chains, and that caution itself can lead to domestic downturn.
Professor Chao, Trump's tariff policy has been inconsistent, as we already know. In early February, he threatened to impose tariffs on imports from Mexico, Canada, and China. However, while the tariffs on Chinese goods took effect, those on imports from Canada and Mexico were delayed by a month. So unexpectedly, the 25% tariff on goods from Canada and Mexico that meet the terms of the USMCA were later suspended again. So Trump imposed a 25% tariff on all imported steel and aluminum, which took effect on March 12th. So he had originally threatened to impose an additional 25% tariff on Canada, but that has been canceled. So how can we figure out that his tariff policy, even though you mentioned that tariff is such a significant approach to him?
He has been known as kind of they say, the predictably unpredictable person. So he's kind of someone, rather call him a tariff lunatic. He's a very, exaggerating, trust on tariffs. So given what he has done with regard to Mexico, Canada, now in China, and now, in South Korea, we don't know how and when and how much he's going to conduct, really, execute those kind of tariffs, offensive. So it could be negotiable, and he can change at any moment. So it's hard to foresee what's going to really happen until we see the real thing has been done, on the ground. So, but still, this kind of propaganda, this kind of harassment, if I may use the term, with regard to the country, for South Korea, the impact is already being felt in South Korea. Here, I'd like to cite, a few figures, only two of them. I think that the so-called, the major, stock market, statistic, Korea Composite Stock Price Index, KOSPI, was declined, and the Korean currency has fallen further against the US dollars. So two figures I'd like to quote here. One South Korean think that the Trump's certain tariffs will cause a $44.8 billion US dollar decline in the ROK exports, and the result in the country's GDP contracting by 0.67% rather than continuing to grow. So the impact's already been felt. The damage has been done. In the perception. So South Koreans are worried, although real action has not been seen. So I think that Trump has caused some trouble for South Koreans.
Okay, Dr. Vocke, like the last question for you, could you give us a brief response? Is that Trump said that his changing attitude towards tariff is not inconsistent, but rather flexibility. That's number one. I'll respond to that. And also give some suggestion for Taiwan to find a new strategy for cooperation with him and his administration when it comes to tariff on Taiwan in the future. There's a possibility out there.
Well, clearly, the whole idea of flexibility is that whole idea of uncertainty, and if you're dealing with someone that's uncertain, it makes you less confident in what you should do, and that's a whole part of his strategy, which I think he takes from his real estate dealings, and that's exactly how he's dealing with issues around the world. It certainly has worked in some cases. It tends to work when one country has more leverage than the other country, and the U.S. tends to have much more leverage. In terms of Taiwan, it's important to look at what kind of leverage Korea or Taiwan has vis-a-vis the United States, and I think there are 4 points of leverage. One is geography. Both countries are really important in terms of the relationship with China, which almost everyone says is the key global relationship in the next century. The second piece of leverage is that each of those two countries, Korea and Taiwan, have specific industries that are very important to America. TSMC, shipbuilding. We could go on and name some others, but there are some specific things that make those countries important. Thirdly, and this is no longer important for Trump, there was values, heritage, history, and democracy, and that doesn't seem to be part. And then the fourth piece of leverage that Taiwan or Korea has with the American administration is transactions. And there will be transactions on tariffs, there will be transactions on buying more military equipment, on upgrading your military, on decreasing your trade balance with the United States, your trade surplus with the United States. And all of those things indicate that there's going to be a long and difficult period in East Asia relationships with the Trump administration, just like there has been in Europe, but not now.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Vocke and Professor Chao, thank you for great insights in the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Like our show, subscribe to Taiwan Talks. See you soon.